Hi guys, Luton here, and we're back for some more Dawn of War 3. Now this was an event I attended on February 20th here in London, hosted by Sega and Relic. We got to play some multiplayer against other guys. There was a lot of people in the room, and it was 1-on-1 or 2v2 action. I got to play Eldar Orcs. I'd already played Space Marines before, so I decided to focus on Eldar and Orcs. I'm a big fan of Eldar because my own army for tabletop is built on, and that's why I'm going built on. So we've got here, you can choose your elites. Okay, so we have these huge elites coming in. We'll talk a little bit about where this game is going shortly. So this is pretty cool. We've got the elite selection units here, and this is Genzar. She's the Phoenix Lord of the Howling Banshee. She's the matriarch of the Banshees. Really, really fast, intense melee unit. And you can highlight over here and check out the abilities. So this is Silent Death. This throws the Silent Death in the target direction. Pierces, doing damage to units it passes through. Upon reaching its destination, it returns to Genzar. And each of these has like a little video where you can actually see how this happens. Good for new players, gives them an idea of actually what the capabilities are, and helps you to understand the mechanics of the game. So it's kind of cool, and it does this for all of the elite's abilities. You can go through and check that out and figure what these are. She also has the ability of dash, and of course dash is pretty self-explanatory. She dashes in the target direction. If she collides with an enemy or Silent Death, she jumps a set distance and throws 8 projectiles outwards from a position. The projectiles will pierce, doing damage to units they pass through. So again, this kind of, it helps you plan your attacks by kind of understanding the mechanics. So again, good for new players. That kind of goes in line with their talk that they've been saying about making this game a bit more accessible to people, and I guess part of that is the introductions you do. Then we've got the Wraith Knight, and the Wraith Knight is of course a really super heavy walker with massive burst damage with Wraith Cannons. They can open a rift in the warp, disrupting units before unleashing devastating damage. We've got the jump ability, so the Wraith Knight jumps to target position, can use to slide forward a distance, causing damage and knock back in a circle around the Wraith Knight. Now, of course, there's been a lot of questions when it comes to some of these elite units and their actual power abilities, especially with Eldar and the Wraith Cannons, and how they're meant to work in the lore versus how they've been utilized in the game and the damage they deal and so on and so on. The trouble is when you have something like a Wraith Cannon, makes it kind of hard to balance in a game like this. This is Distortion Rift, which the Wraith Knight opens up a rift in the warp at the target position, causes a knockback towards the center of an expanding circle. Vehicles within the circle are slowed. So you can see kind of how this works just against infantry right here, dragging those guys together. That can be useful when, for example, you wanted to do like a combo attack, so you could kind of drag these guys together, and then if you had like some other squads around, throw in some grenades in, Guardians get some grenades in or something like this, you could utilize that, or some other kind of AoE effect. Then you got the focused beam, and of course that's basically a focused beam. The Wraith Knight is firing a powerful beam of energy in the target direction, causes damage over time in a line. So again, this is powerful when you have a set of concentrated units together. And again, perhaps you could use those other two abilities in combination to kind of really deal a massive amount of damage. So we're going to go into the gameplay, but one thing that a lot of people have been asking about is kind of, what is this game? Is it Dawn of War 2? Is it Dawn of War 1? How is it going to play? The answer is really a combination of the two. So you have the Dawn of War elements in terms of having to destroy your enemy's shield generators, then their turrets, and then finally crushing the power core at their base. But the Dawn of War 2 elements that come in are definitely more in the way the units play, and we have the large units like the elites and things like this coming in. Of course, we've got the bigger units than we've ever seen before now, and that often feels a little bit like Company of Heroes in that regard, in terms of like those super units you get towards the end of a round and deciding your tactics in terms of how do you want to play. Do you want to push really, really hard early game, try and cripple the enemy before they can get to that point? Are you going to stack it up? You're going to defend a little bit in the early game, try and wait for those larger units so you can finally push through and have like a major assault going on. It's like, how do you want to play it? But yeah, I mean, one of the other things that people have talked a lot about, of course, is the cover system, and people really enjoyed, and this actually also links together with the aesthetics in terms of some of the units. One of the biggest criticisms that I've seen people talking about is the fact that many of the units, in terms of animation, they tend to just stand together in a block and shoot. They don't kind of hide in behind cover. They don't have a lot of animation going on in terms of their individuality, I suppose. And there's a very, very specific reason for that when you think about it, and it's pretty plain to see for everybody, which is that this is a very different game to Dawn of War 2. Dawn of War 2 was much more about that kind of micromanagement of the units, and therefore, again, Dawn of War 2 is a game which was much more like Company of Heroes in that respect, I think, because you had those kind of, it was much more about controlling those units. Now, in the early stages of the game right now, like we're seeing, it feels like that, because you have less units because it's the early game. As the game progresses and becomes, you have more and more units and you're having these bigger battles, you lose that completely. And, again, you can see that as a positive or a negative, because you might not want that. You might not want that kind of, I suppose the best way to describe it is kind of clusterfuck gameplay, where all the units are kind of charging together and you have these gigantic battles, and it can become quite difficult to really manage all of those units at the same time, because there's often a lot of things going on, different units coming from different times. And I actually feel like sometimes with the elites, it can be kind of tricky to actually get their specific abilities to work in at a certain time when there is a lot of other things happening. Trying to get in onto your unit, or just if you've keybound it up, of course, select that unit, get in there and do a specific ability. It can be quite tricky depending on what's actually happening on screen, and I can actually see that some people may not like that. But again, on the other hand, some people want these big battles where you have full-on action happening, and you've got the skimmers coming in, and you've got the big elite units coming in towards the end of the game. You've got heavies coming in, all of this kind of stuff. Whether it's like Wraithguard or whether it's Terminators or what. Okay, you've got the heavier stuff coming in later on, and vehicles, tanks, dreadnoughts, all this kind of stuff, right? So basically, yeah, it's kind of like a curious combination of the two things. And I also think that I can understand where people are coming from in terms of saying some of the stuff with this game looks, much more like other RTS stuff like StarCraft and things like this, because of the way the units stack and stand. But the thing is that you can't really have that kind of cover system that you would have had with Dawn of War 2 when you're having these larger scale battles, because to a point it worked, but to a different degree it doesn't, and I think they've just gone for a different option. Now personally, I actually much preferred the cover system in Dawn of War 2 than what we're having here, because I like that level of control. I like that level of being able to control the units and place them behind defensive positions and move them up. It's why I like Company of Heroes. I really, really enjoyed the strategy of Company of Heroes, because it's easier to defend positions. Often in this, you don't feel like you're really defending. You have these defensive points like here that you can see, but they're set. They're set. You can't really move out from them, and sometimes that limits you, because you think, well, I actually would prefer to kind of set up a defensive position nearer to here, or on the side of here, or in a different place, and so that limits your tactical options, because you're like, well, this is my defense choke point, so I guess that's where I'm going to be. And I think also to a point that's deliberate, because I think the reason that they've done that is so that they can create sections where you will get battles, so it's like you either have to hold that point or push that point, so it's focusing the battle together so that you bring your units together. Okay, so I think there's specific reasons why they've done that, and again, that's their choice. I mean, Dawn of War 3 is going to be what it is, and there's not really any getting away from that at this time. And I think actually, from a lot of people that I see complaining about this game, there's not a lot of point to that at this stage, because these are not things that are really going to be able to change at this point in time. It's not like Battlefield or something like this, where you can intrinsically go in and kind of change out specific elements. Like we've been talking a lot about Battlefield right now, in terms of what can we do to improve team play. Well, those are things that you can alter without changing the kind of core fundamental mechanics of the game, right? Those are things where you can just change up timers, or you can try and lay down incentives for how people work together. That's not really going to be able to do what kind of people are talking about here in terms of this game. A lot of people, are saying about, well, we want to have a cover system. Well, I mean, that's pretty fundamental. That would require a major shift in how they probably design this game and balance this game in all these kind of respects, So it's probably unrealistic to expect that that's going to happen. Now, again, not to say that I wouldn't like to see that happen. I actually personally would have preferred to see that with this game. And I think one of the reasons why people like that is because they like to focus that down on those specific units and feel that control with those units. Whereas when you're obviously having a larger battle, there's less control with those. Now you can see here that I've obviously got some of my guys, and they're kind of standing back firing in, and that's where you get this kind of staticness. You see there's no cover, there's no position for me to take to actually assist those guys in terms of giving them extra defense or giving them any kind of cover, or them taking up kind of just grouped positions. They're just kind of standing in the open firing, and I think that's the biggest issue that a lot of people are having. And I have to agree, actually, myself personally, it's not that I don't enjoy this game, because I do enjoy it, but it just doesn't quite look right when they're just stood out in the open, just happily just being shot to pieces. You combine that with the fact that, you know, they didn't have a retreat mechanic with this game, whereas, you know, the kind of thing that you would have previously where the guys can flee right back to base. It feels like they've designed the game to, you know, almost deliberately lose units. So you don't almost have to... So I think almost to take that away, and again, you could argue, well, why have they done that? Have they done that because they want to simplify the game so that new players to the game don't have to worry about making those decisions, or have they done it because they literally want to just see this carnage on the battlefield, so that basically once you've committed units to a fight, you almost can't disengage them, and it's a bloodbath. You know, they want to see that bloodbath happen. But again, personally, I don't like losing units. You know, if you're suddenly you find yourself sometimes in a situation where you think, you know, you didn't balance it, you didn't play it right, you thought that the enemy had less, or you thought that they were in a different position when actually they were hiding, and they jump out, they ambush you, and you think, Jesus, I need to get out of here. It's frustrating not having that. So yeah, that was an issue which I raised actually originally the first time I went to Relic. I highlighted the fact that I was unhappy about there not being a retreat mechanic, and that's something which I say even now. You know, I really would like to see a retreat mechanic as you have in like Company of Heroes, and also previously in Dawn of War 2. So yeah, that's a big deal. But other than that, you know, did I enjoy the gameplay? Did I enjoy the game? Yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for sure. But I personally feel like there were some tweaks and changes which don't make it feel quite like what people are expecting. Similarly, you know, just like I've said before, in terms of Dawn of War 2, I preferred that micromanagement. And a lot of the times with this, you feel that a little in the early game, but as you progress midway through towards the later game, that starts to creep away, because the sheer number of units that you have, it becomes problematic in terms of managing them, you know. And again, it's not like you can sort of grab those guys, say, okay, a couple of those retreat, you can hold the line. And again, because they can't take any defensive positions live on the map, you can see right now that this map is very, very open in terms of cover. You know, there's nothing really here. It's just a flat sort of stone space. It looks great, it looks nice stone space, but there's no real cover there. It's just kind of open lanes. And so when they encounter one another, the two armies kind of come up together and they just start shooting. And then you'll get the elites in, and they'll do like some special abilities. Maybe you get the skimmers in, and maybe they'll kind of come around. I suppose I should just mention off of the skimmer, it is cool that the skimmers can go across spaces now, so where infantry cannot go. That obviously gives you some real flexibility in terms of transporting units. It makes those skimmers way more valuable, because, for example, you could have skimmers in a kind of centralized position, and then if you need to transport units quickly across the map to any position, you can just, you know, go over these gaps, these voids, and get them there. Whereas otherwise the infantry would have to obviously run all the way around, and that takes a long time. So there's some real tactical ability there in how that happens. The elites as well, like we've said, I love the elites in terms of their abilities. They're really cool, they're interesting, and I think, you know, whilst they are quite sort of cartoonish, they do still sit within the context of 40k, because 40k, as I've said before, is quite sort of, it's a highly imaginative, I often think, bonkers universe. It's quite ridiculous sometimes. It's so over the top, 40k, as I have mentioned many times before. And so the abilities that they have are kind of, you know, in keeping with that. They're kind of crazily over the top. But, you know, another thing that I think is that because of the scale they've gone for, and this actually, let's talk on aesthetic, because I know people care about that a lot, and I've made videos about that before. The aesthetic, I know people care about this a lot. And the thing is like I said on a previous video, when it comes to 40k and aesthetic, people can have different opinions about that. It's pretty subjective. There's no rule about how things are supposed to look in the game. And like I illustrated on previous videos, if you look at tabletop models, you have people design their models in different ways. So some people are going to paint their models up to be pristine, clean, because they love that look and that feel. Other people are going to convert their models, they're going to paint them up differently, they're going to make them look gritty, grimy, bloodstained, scarred, whatever. Personally, my own models are a combination of the two. So some of my Eldar, my Beotan, I tend to keep the Eldar clean, because I figure, well, the Eldar are Eldar, they're going to keep their armor and their units in really good order, so they're going to look clean and new and beautiful, right? Unless they've been fighting a harsh campaign, they've not had any ability to kind of get back and sort that out. Whereas my Space Marines, I often figure the Space Marines are kind of a bit more they're right in the shit, you know, and they're kind of like they're taking the battle. So a lot of my Space Marines I customize with little bullet scars, cracks in their armor, and elements like this, so that they look a little bit more battle worn. Especially some of my first company veterans, I really like to kind of customize some of the elements with them in terms of like little unique bits and pieces on them. But yeah, when it comes to the game itself, I think that's the thing, you see, is that it's a subjective thing. And I think that also, yeah, what I was going to say was that, you know, when you're looking at things on a bigger scale because they want to get those bigger armies in, that kind of detail, that kind of element in terms of making the units more gritty be great, but I don't think it makes a lot of sense because often it's just not something you're looking at. Because you're too busy worrying about, like, oh, those units moving here, are they going there, what's happening on the ground, da-da-da. There are way more other important priorities for you than those things, you see. But that's within the context of this game, because of the scale of some of the units and some of the battles that you have going on. Like, you can see right now, look at the amount of fire. It's like, I'm not zooming in on these units to see how interesting and cool they look. Look at the explosions and look at all the UI all over the place. Look at this, you know, the Wraith Knight's dropping his, like, massive distortions down, okay, with the Wraith Cannon. So, all of this kind of stuff is happening. You're not looking, like, look, right now, you tell me you can go in and see, like, the detail on those units. You can't see it because you're too far back and there's too much going on. So you're not going to see that kind of stuff. But within the context of a game like Dawn of War 2, you're going to see that stuff more because you're near it in on the action and you can see more of that detail. So I can understand people's passion about that and I can understand them wanting to have that there. But one, it doesn't matter, and two, it doesn't matter within the context of this game and the style they've gone for, you know? So yes, if they had made a game like Dawn of War 2, where you had a lot more focus on the kind of, I would say, almost skirmish battles that are happening back and forth, those push-pull battles back and forth, then yeah, it definitely makes sense within that. But within this game, just the way the game plays, it doesn't matter and it doesn't make sense, really. So, I mean, look at this, like with the orcs. You know, and the fact that when you click on any of your units as well, they have like an outline around them. You can see this, look, whenever I select my units, they get like a clear line around them, okay, or a coloured line around them. Again, you know, that kind of shatters any kind of sense of immersion, or, you know, that, or, you know, the cinematic look of a character if they have like a huge sort of thing, and all the UI models and all this kind of stuff. So again, when you look at units individually out of context of the battle, then I can understand people kind of freaking out about it. But when you see it within the context of the game itself and the battle, it really doesn't matter, and you're probably not even going to spend any of your time worrying about that because you're too busy fighting the game. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention, and of course we're battling with orcs here. The orcs are a very, very interesting faction to play, and, you know, as always, orcs, they're just kind of blood crazy, and you just need to build their numbers and crush the enemy. You know, it really is the full-on orc warg. You know, you just need to get in there and, like, fuck them up, basically. That's the way to play with the orcs. But, you know, they do have a lot of their own kind of interesting tactics to play with, especially in terms of getting the war going on and grabbing the extra scrap for upgrading the units, making them stronger. Gretchens, for example, can kind of upgrade stuff on the fly. The gigantic elite here as well, he can kind of repair himself on the fly, all sorts of different abilities. The orcs are very, very interesting and creative in some of the abilities they have with the game, and they're pretty interesting faction to play with, much more so than the Eldar, which the Eldar are very, I don't know, yeah, I will say one thing, which is that each faction does feel incredibly uniquely different. You know, they have really different play styles, and I can very much imagine that sort of balancing that is tricky. It's going to be interesting for people to kind of master those factions and get them to play. But yeah, the thing I was going to say was, in terms of factions, we still haven't heard anything about other factions at all. I haven't heard anything about other factions at all, and I do think this is starting to worry some people a lot. It is concerning me even slightly. I want to know what the deal is with that. Are they going to... I for one, 100%, I don't think they're going to release or talk about any factions before release. I don't think that's going to happen. And with multiplayer, there's a huge question mark about it. And I cannot conceive that they're going to have a multiplayer where there are only 3 factions. And if they haven't announced or spoken about it in any shape or form at this point in time, then it leaves you with a big question mark of when are they going to do that? And how are they going to do that? And what form might that take? Are we looking at a possibility where all other factions are DLC? It's not impossible. It's definitely a possibility. Anything's possible in 2017. But I don't know. That's a big question. I think it would be bad for them. I think that the community would not react well to that, and I think they should be extremely cautious of that. It will be interesting to see what happens. On the other hand, what are they going to do? do free updates and just release the factions as the game goes along, so that maybe you start off with these 3 and then they periodically release them up. If they do that, I think people will be fine with that and people will be happy with that. But just mark my words, you make those other factions DLC, people are going to be pissed off, and it's just as simple as that. Guys, I think I'll just finish up by asking you a very straightforward question. What is the most important core element for you in this game? Tell me down below in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time for some more 40k.